I want to thank everyone, not only for participating, but thank you for your support all the way around, especially financial help. We could not do this without support from you. So thank you. Please continue to do that if you can. So, what was the title again?
Can you see the humor?
You're asking me?
No, I was trying to say the question,
Oh,
but yes,
so that's something we kind of pose to ourselves because we're often told, even by our own culture, it says, try to lighten up, just see the humor. And I know it's hard for you, but see the humor. And so we often do that, but we do it with our intellect, our thinking process, our analysis of what this is a difficult situation, but should be able to see the humor and just lighten up a little. We're always lecturing ourselves, giving ourselves. Please don't lean against the wall. Thank you. Now, if you have a condition where you need to, then there's a chair. You sit in a chair. That's perfectly okay to do it. Thank you, sir. So you could say, didn't you see the humor in that situation? Yes, I did. That gentleman is also smiling. Thank you, sir. So you see the humor. So the downside of that is often we just get serious and we're just pissed off or upset about something. And if somebody were even to say that to us, we just would make us madder because we're up against what was the conventional image between a rock and a hard place. I always wondered where they came up with that. So there's a rock, there's a hard place. They don't want to tell you what the hard place is. Why don't they say between a rock and a Sherman tank? That's a hard place. Or between a rock and a mountain. A rock and a hard place. It's like leaving it open to see because you have your own personal hard place. Okay, I'm done with that. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. Can you see the humor? Well, the downside is probably you can't, but if you look at that and you could actually ask when something comes up, when you are having difficulty, you might ask yourself that, is there humor in this? Is there any spaciousness in this at all? The failure, the success story that ego might get would not be so good because then ego gets a credential out of maybe making a joke out of it, possibly. But also the failure, this is why it's so interesting. If you are a meditator, you can see this and understand this maybe more deeply than someone who has very little practice working with awareness. Receive. You have to be a receiver in order to see that the failure to see the humor is the spaciousness. The failure, that's where the ego starts to deconstruct because it does not like to fail. But if you polish it up and refurbish it and put it back together and lecture yourself about you should be able to see the humor, just a flash on that you can't might be more valuable for your spiritual path than trying to be full of laughter about something that is difficult, that might have some gaps in it that might lead you to humor. So I'm not saying stop that. I'm saying if that shows up, then of course. But it is the spaciousness that is the very nature of humor. This is quite often how comedians get us to laugh because they'll have to set something up and then they pull the rug out and then we say, oh, it's that. Then we may begin to laugh. Some people are extremely good at that. Anybody think of a comedian that's extremely good at that? I can think of a few that were extremely bad that were famous. One of them was Jack Benny. Not funny, but told a lot of jokes. I don't think anyone's here old enough here to even remember. Few people are. So again, we're coming back to that same idea that I am repeating all the time. It's the awareness of that, not the success story or the failure story or anything about it, just the awareness of what shifts and goes this way or that way in the consciousness as we introduce something like the humor, or can I see the humor in that? Or I can't really see the humor. That's not funny. Then we might go into another role of intellect or judgment about how can I possibly see the humor in something where someone has abused me or disrespected me or treated me in such a way. It's just not funny. Again, awareness. Bringing the awareness to that so that you can actually see the underlayment of anything that's showing up usually has other kinds of things beneath it. That anger, that passion, or that blame, or that distraction or ignorance is probably covering up something that if you continue to look at it long enough, it will start to reveal itself. You'll start to see it. That's why it's so important to return. No matter how disappointing the practice may be, or how much you feel like you can't quite deal with that constant return of the difficulty or the anger or the passion, aggression, ignorance, however it may be showing up, depending on the story that's been triggered, how you can't, you just are kind of helpless in that area. So what's important to do then? Return to awareness, return to training the mind to see clearly, because how you act or how you react is not important. Although ego will try to control that to get a credential for getting better or having a sense of humor, or there's all kinds of razzmatazz going on there in the area of spiritual, psychological materialism, getting somewhere using whatever spiritual techniques, psychological techniques. And it's not that you can't do some relative improvements, but it's not the spiritual path.
Beyond bowing, you've used the words humor and funny a little interchangeably as you speak here. So is seeing the humor in something always funny, haha?
Of course. Could be some of that. Something could be humorous, haha, funny as you asked. Might be, but no, it might be just the spaciousness of, you might not break into laughter at all, but you might have an appreciation for the spaciousness of whatever it was arising that a few minutes ago had you by the throat, and then you see the complete spaciousness around whatever's happening, and you don't necessarily push it away. You don't necessarily explain it or blame anything for it, though you might be very clear on what triggered it, but you know that's the trigger and the actual causation are not the same thing.
Beyond bowing. So can the discovery of that spaciousness that's related to humor also be a little devastating?
Probably will be. Once you have it in that area, we can go further into that if you like.
Beyond bowing, I don't often think of humor as something that is associated with like maybe a sense of loss, but is there a humor that you see that is also inclusive of loss? Or
yes, you might call it, if you wanted another word, it might be a much more sophisticated sense of there are other words and nothing's coming up right now, but just the challenge of the kind of the complexity that's so complex that it can become humorous to some extent, not how making fun of someone, but how much people struggle. If you see someone just struggling with something that you see because of your practice, because of what you've been through in your life, you might not be able to offer any help to them, but you see someone struggling with something that you can see that they're creating more. Not that there isn't some original difficulty there, but they're kind of adding to it and making it worse for themselves. You see that somehow there's a sense of humor in that, but it's certainly not something you laugh at. It's kind of my own experience, and the image I often say, and you've heard me say before, is my own ego is still hanging around but it's like a clown. It's not particularly believable. I don't believe it enough to even push it away. I don't have to not have an ego. It's just part of dependent origination. By not doing much with it, it doesn't have a lot of staying power. You know, it might show up and taunt me a little bit, looking for credit or control. Then if I just watch it, and it runs out of steam. Anytime any negative energy has you by the throat and just comes up and just hangs there, you know, look at the energy without leaving it by searching for what caused it. Please don't do that. I might not be talking particularly about humor here, but I am talking about awareness. Just look at the intensity of something that has its claws into you, so to speak. Just look at it. Because nothing is fundamentally suffering. Suffering is suffering. The emotion is the first noble truth. Life, being alive, is suffering. We add on the identity of someone who's suffering, that shouldn't be happening to them. We need to feel better. So we create a dynamic that may show up, like I just talked about just a moment ago, may show up as kind of humorous, that someone is suffering so much, and yet you can see the way they're creating it. Quite often we see it in young people. You might see it in your daughter, or she might see it in you. Come to think of it, and you might just look at it, and you might even come to where you actually have a laugh about how ridiculous the whole thing is. Getting close to what you're interested in discussing, or is there, you want to take it further?
Another question
Sure.
that is, who is in the sense of humor here? Who
A
is,
louder so others can possibly.
when it comes to humor here and the lighter laughing side, who is laughing? Who is laughing about ego?
Good question. How does it look to you? It sounds like you have an idea of what that is. Do you?
I think so.
Okay. No one's laughing, just laughter. It's just consciousness. The interesting thing about consciousness only is this is happening with everybody. This isn't some kind of new experience that you've been ego-centered all your life and suddenly you start experiencing consciousness only. You experienced it when you were in the 8th grade and you were walking out of the building and watching what happened with this person and that person, the interaction between these two people. You were just present. But since there's no identity there, there's no credential showing up. You might not even realize it. You pass in and out of awakening all the time. There's a waking state. There's the dreaming state, and then there's a sleeping state, and there's awakening. It's just traditional teaching. Most human beings are in the first three. No, I'm not making it 20. Are you? Good. Yes. Bailed me out. He's after me. Aren't you? Can't teach without a student. Go ahead.
If we see the spaciousness in a difficult situation, does it lessen the suffering?
It could. I mean, there's no guarantee of it. There's so many nuances, so many different areas there that have to do with all the different things that show up to provide us with this particular instance of a apparent occurrence of this person, this person, this person all together interacting, or you're interacting with one other person. The karma that brings us into this so-called present moment is extremely complicated. So if you begin to see some of the spaciousness there, the suffering may be there, but your understanding goes beyond just the simple suffering of this caused that, into an extensiveness that's like seeing the trees are suffering. I'm not trying to be romantic. I'm just saying you just see that all suffering is all pervasive, and it is not separate from wisdom, and pain is not separate from pleasure. But that's not something you can smash together and say, well, they're the same. You can't do that. You have to actually receive both of them before you will understand what is being said here. And this is just not something I invented last week. This is something I'm looking at and something that I was taught, and it took me decades before I began to understand what was being pointed at. As I've said several times, I'll say it again, even though this can be somewhat abrasive to people. I'm looking at something, this, you're looking at something, this. I know what it is, and you don't. When I say I know what it is, like simple words, it's not separate. But I know that, and you, not just you, and it's different for everyone. This is showing up in different ways. Not everyone is like stuck on the same freight train. It's so variable depending on the karma that you're showing up here with. But if you saw what this is, you would not be miserable, nor would you be elated. The positionlessness, the position of everything starts to come apart, because those are based on a position of being other than that, or a position of being other than that. And so I say it has us by the throat, not always, but sometimes it has us. And so that has to be seen, not gotten rid of or justified or pushed, anything. So you may begin to see some lightening up in that area. Less suffering to come back to what you were actually asking. Yes, I would say so. But it's not realization yet. It's just the path, and it starts to show up in different ways. Some people might never see that. They might go along and just suddenly everything falls apart in one afternoon or in 30 seconds. Then another person has to go very slowly over a long period of time. I'm the last kind, and I'm still looking at it. There's been no destination show up. Go ahead.
When it has us by the throat, how do we find the spaciousness?
Look at the lack, look at the grip. Looks like there's no space. It's like a claustrophobic negativity or anger, resentment, and that probably has a few impacted stories around it that are supporting that. The fundamental feeling is just suffering, but then there's usually some kind of a story that's supporting that when we start to see the spaciousness of the suffering, the story will come in and jam on it a little bit more to reinforce that. I sometimes call it ramping. Something's happening, you don't like it, and then instead of when it starts to come apart, the ego gets threatened, because then the ego might start to realize, what, I'm kind of foolish here. And so we start to just tell a story to ourselves. Well, if he hadn't done that, I wouldn't be feeling this way. If he hadn't, they hadn't, she hadn't, or if I hadn't. And then we tell that story, and then we tell another version of the story, and we just keep ramping one on top of another. So there's no space, because the stories are just chattering away. So you could be quiet and listen and receive. Difficult.
Thank you.
Those are bowing
With those questions you were telling me you were going to
the claustrophobia of something having you by the throat, or even just those piles of stories.
Yes.
That seems like the opposite of the spaciousness.
It does.
So is the spaciousness a position?
Everything is a position. Anything you can point out is a position. Even awakening or enlightenment, or the fourth state of after the first three that I mentioned. It's always a state until it's not. When it's not, then you might fall asleep. It's that open.
Was it bowing? If we're trying to flash on the spaciousness, are we taking a position?
Yes, but it's also awareness of doing it. It's not about controlling what you do or or anything. And as Sokuzan was quoting, I can't remember the teacher's name, he's quoted it several times, and I think it's a very good thing to point out. Is this teacher was saying, I think Sokuzan's on here somewhere, but his teacher was saying, I don't care, I'm paraphrasing, I don't care what you do, I just want you to be clear. I want you to be clear about what you're seeing so you can see clearly. And that's what's important. That's what's emphasis is here. My way of saying it is you may need to be a monk, you may not. It's none of my business. If you are a monk, then I might give you more feedback than I would to somebody who was not ordained at all. Then situationally, I might give them quite a bit of feedback. Don't do that. Don't go there. Quit that job, or get out of that relationship. Or I may just spontaneously do that. And another person may want that kind of feedback, and I just say, no, you're going to have to work with that. You must, every one of you that you've been around me very much, you see that I pretty much meet you, whatever kind of jungle you're swimming around in. I sit there with you and we look at it together, just like the talk title that came up. The three of us talked about that, and I had some really good titles, and they didn't like them, so we didn't do those. But kinda, wasn't it? Somewhat like that, I think. You?
Was it going? My initial question was, most of what I'm angry about is really just crap people have said that shows up in my memories.
What?
Not being able to forget things.
This is the one you were bringing up in the Hojo.
It is.
And that's the first question, and that's what started this whole rigmarole that we call the talk title. These are the hardest thing to do here, my friends and my enemies. Let me see if I have enemies. Yeah, there's one. The hardest thing is to actually come up with a topic. I can talk all day, and I'm just a regular jabberwocky. But sometimes thinking of what is a topic? It's like, because it puts me in the spot, because I know that any title I think I show up, that is it. That's it. I just say the talk title. You follow me a little bit on that? Do you? Why not? What are you thinking about, something else? What are you thinking about?
What you're saying, I don't understand.
That's understanding. I'm not pointing at your particular thing, but when I sometimes say it's important to study the material, it's important to come to the talk. It's not important to understand what it is. This is what Dogen is talking about. Almost all of his teachings, he's talking in such a way that there's no way you can understand what he's talking about. What an astonishing teacher he was, and still is, because we study him all the time. And scholars study him and try to understand, write books on it. And quite often they're quite good books. Go ahead, ask the question again.
Was it about? Well, it's a slightly different question. So I keep losing the question now.
Ondo, help her.
Thank you.
What was she asking about? She's saying, what do I do when something happens, somebody does something? You might be surprised I can remember this. Well, what do I do when that keeps coming up in my mind? This is what I call ramping. We just ramp. Something comes up, the suffering of it comes up, and instead of just receiving the suffering, we revert to, you could say, the story about it, what they did, how to like what they did. When we have some resentment building up, and we're getting close to what you're asking about, and how do we work with that? Return to the suffering. Return to how it feels. How it feels. If you're jealous, return to the jealousy. If you're angry, return to the anger. Keep it very, very simple and direct. You will not be able to do that in the mind stream unless you have a lot of sitting practice under your so-called belt, because that's so easy for that to convert into just an interior conversation with yourself about evaluating somebody or something and trying to figure out a way to stop feeling a certain way. Circular. But if there's a lot of sitting practice, then it's possible to just return to just the feeling itself. Just return, just how does it feel? And then you can also go a little further. Sometimes it's recommended to do this, but not as a standard. But who's feeling that way? Look at the identity part of it. Question the identity. Who is that? Who am I? Yes.
Divine, is there difference between relative and fundamental or ultimate humor?
I think I'm not that I can be coming up with ultimate humor wouldn't be anything at all. It'd just be the space. There'd be no chuckling in the background. You need a contrast to see the humor, but it creates a path quality.
What about how does the contrast open up space?
We see how we are aware of how tight everything gets, so you're just tightened up, and then you see the spaciousness around that. You could say it's like seeing something occur, and instead of being fascinated or fixated on that, trying to keep that going or push that away, ego, or pull that into blame or blame someone or something for that feeling. It creates a solidity that also creates a solid feeling of somebody who's having this experience. The simple duality of it. It's just reinforced by anytime you do anything with anything that arises, including name it. Just the simple naming of something creates a polarity between you and that what you've just named. Not that that's incorrect. We're not trying to stop naming anything particularly, but just be aware of what's happening in that area.
Quantifying, it seems like when you say humor and on the spiritual path, it seems to be different than what we would normally say on the mundane
A
path.
funny joke.
Yes, but yet you're saying there's a contrast. The contrast is what makes humor.
I think highly. What is the name for it? What a more sophisticated name for humor? Other than just laughing at something because it's somebody pulled the rug out or something. Yes.
Sure. No, you defined it once, I think, to a question of mine, and that humor is unexpected space.
That's pretty good. I said that. I probably stole it from somebody. But it is. It's like along that line, we start to believe, and so we believe in something. We see ourselves believing something, like someone who the joke and the punchline. It's that kind of a thing. There's a setup, someone says something, and then suddenly it turns and goes a different way. And then we see that spaciousness, and we might start to laugh about it because we notice how the contrast of how much we've been believing something. It was true. And that can happen just in your own mind stream. You see that the way that you're believing your thoughts and your ideas and your emotions, and you see that, and then in some area in there, you just see the space around all of your thoughts. Seeing the space around thoughts isn't exactly thinking. I don't think that can be understood deeply without a lot of sitting practice. I'm not talking about an hour a day, although that's good. We can do that more. I'd do some block sitting once a week or more. Sit down, hold still, watch the movement for 4 or 5 hours, 4 hours anyway. Yes.
Sokuzan. So that example of being angry because a memory keeps coming back in your mind, it hasn't actually harmed me. It's just a memory. So why is right speech or kind, unmean speech, why is that important if it doesn't really harm us?
I mean, why is it okay to just be mean?
Yeah.
You really need help with that?
You responded to it in the hojo. I thought it was pretty good.
What did I say?
Something about the way that unkind speech kicks the wheel. Does it kick the wheel of karma?
Yes, there's even though we don't buy into this against that particularly, but the more the negative activity, the more difficult it is for you to see the fundamental nature of this, the more real, solid, believable, and threatening everything is when we start to fight with others, we fight with our world, and we end up with, there's examples everywhere in the world of people who are, you talk to them, they have pretty good intentions. You might even have relatives that have pretty good intentions and seem pretty reasonable until you find out about their political stance. And then you wonder how they could possibly look at things that way. So once you start going into that negative area, and I'm not going to talk politics particularly, but once you start going into that, then everything starts to fall in line with it, because that satisfies on some level the ego. And eventually someone who is really deep in hell or in one of the three lower realms doesn't know it, because the consciousness has been completely covered up by what? Shutting down, ignoring, shutting down. It's like not to pick on animals particularly, but it's like an animal is dwelling on whatever's in front of it. That's not awareness so much as a dwelling on the dirt, or dwelling on the grass. It's not looking at anything else. It's not aware of the spaciousness of the sky. So that stuck in that animal realm, that distraction from everything except just what they are looking at, just that. And that doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that they're sealed off from the rest of the world, from their humanity, you could say. Just like grasping or feeling like your politics, your ideas, and your beliefs, your opinions. Belief is just an incredible shutting down of the open spaciousness, open dimension of being, to put it relatively. As is anger or warfare. Look at the warfare in the world. Just not only all the politics, the insanity there of grasping, controlling, and taking whole groups of people and thinking it's okay to murder them. Well, they have a whole politics now. Well, they murdered us. Well, they attacked them, so they killed our people, so that we have to let them get away with that. There's a whole philosophy. Those people do not know their suffering. They're able to download their suffering on the rest of the world and justify it, validate it, and actually have some relief. Good example of that was that movie, Zone of Interest. Was that the name of it? You see the movie, The Zone of Interest. It's about what is it?
Herman Hesse?
Not Herman Hesse. It's I can't remember his name, but he was over Auschwitz, and his family lived just outside the gate where these towers, all smoke is coming out, where people are being burned, and they're in there living in their little. And the whole thing is you hardly see them at all other than the smoke. It's all focused on just a mundane interaction, petty grievances of the children and the family, and it was pretty telling in that just a complete ignorance of what's happening just across the wall, because those are vermin or something like that. They didn't even bother talking about it. And one of the things, I think I mentioned it recently in a talk or a book study or something, where one of the comments between it was a Rudolf Hess and one of the people in the community was interested in having workers, and he's saying, "Don't worry, I'm not going to send them all up the smokestack. You'll have your workers." Just as they're cattle or something, or worse, human beings. This is an incredible ignorance that protects them from suffering, from their own personal suffering, by torturing others and putting the difficulty on others and thinking that they're bad. Extreme prejudice that happened during the Holocaust. That's just one that's actually going on all over the place, and our society goes on. People are tortured or shut down, and they're trying to do it with laws and so on. So that's the three lower realms. What is that? Animal realm, hungry ghost realm. Greed is the hungry ghost realm. It's people who greed. They're billionaires. So that's all they think about is more money, more money. They don't realize they're in one of the three lower realms, according to Buddhism, and they don't actually have a suffering. They sit and eat their breakfast and talk about business or whatever it may be, but they will die. And then what's going to happen with that consciousness? We don't know. It's no good. And of course, the hell realm is the one where they're riding around in Bradley fighting vehicles and arguing about, are we going to have these new missiles? I don't know if you've heard about these new missiles that we're going to do. Here I am going off in political stuff I said I was going to do, but it shows up. It's our world, and this world is unstable It's not looking good. I don't know if we're going to get out of it through voting, but we should vote anyway. And of course, the most important thing, and is train your mind to see clearly so you don't, in your own interactions with others, your immediate family or relationships, that you don't add on to the suffering of the world by projecting your own passion, aggression, ignorance on others. You're responsible for your feelings. Anything that shows up in your mind is yours, not yours the person, but yours the consciousness that is showing up as a living being, because your true nature is not even a living being. It's just consciousness. It just happens to manifest as a crow, as a rose, as a human being. Just consciousness just doesn't see that lilacs are somehow not as good as a human being. It's consciousness showing up. And you are that consciousness, but you're not necessarily limited to being a human being. Don't believe anything you're saying. Consider what I'm saying. Run it through your own microprocessor. Spend a lot of time looking at nothing, the wall, so that you can see something. What is that something? Illusion. Illusion is looking at illusion. And if illusion is seen to be looking at illusion, there'll be no credential there for an identity. This is an illusion. So consciousness. Vishnapti matra, fancy word for it. Or is it Vishnapti matra ta? What's the difference?
The ta.
Huh? The what?
In long value. The ta at the end, the suffix.
Well, what does the suffix mean?
Like R and S and ESS.
And I said Rudolph S, not Ness. Now, is that humor? Did you say that was humor? You weren't listening.
Hessness.
That's humor, huh? Yes. I will stop picking on you. The way you're scratching your head, I probably should stop. Silly. Yes.
Well, Divine, as practitioners, what is the difference for us if we are aware of the fixation or aware of the space?
Same thing. Don't do anything about it. If you see that you're fixated, don't go in and try to switch something or be less fixated or correct anything. Don't do anything with it. Awareness, just awareness. Awareness of fixation. That fixation might hang around and become stagnant after a while. It may stay there, it may go away. Consciousness doesn't care what arises or falls away in consciousness. For two reasons, very simple ones. One is just that the sky doesn't care about the clouds. It just is aware that they're coming and going. But the fundamental nature of clouds are space. Fundamental nature of this is space. What was that? What was that scientific thing where it says the body is 95% water or something like that? That's not funny. Would Ani agree with that? He knows quite a bit about water, being in Pisces. Okay, you guys are going to have to help me be more serious here. I know, Milka, you can help me.
Milka bowing. Question from YouTube from Ath. Can fear and humor coexist?
Yes. I don't know if you call it coexisting. It's just they're not separate from each other. But it has to be seen. It can't be saying something. You take the concept of fear and the concept of humor, which I think are the two things that just asked about, and smush them together. But if you see what they are, then they're not separate from each other.
Milka bowing.
Which is not funny.
Tom McCauley asks Tom Bowling, the comedian Stephen Wright is good at pulling the rug out. Example, I saw a diner that said breakfast anytime. So I went in and ordered French toast during the Renaissance. He was responding to your inquiry.
He went in and ordered breakfast during medicine. So that's pretty funny. That's a good example of setting you up, and then some people are extremely gifted at that. Who was the fellow who passed away not too long ago that had the beard? Years ago, and he started out with a shtick called the hippy dippy weatherman.
Carlin?
Huh?
The George Carlin.
George Carlin. He was quite good at pulling the proverbial rug out. Thank you for that. Who was it that?
Tom McCauley.
Tom McCauley. Thank you, Tom. Is there, in a few minutes, if there's another question, we can also close. Up to y'all. Mondo, do you have one? Vigneault? Questions? Good enough. You know,
When you were responding to Bune earlier, you mentioned that you might have a laugh at the ridiculousness of it. What makes something ridiculous?
I think it's when we see that we've kind of created a structure around it, and then when we look at the actual situation, we can see that it's fabricated. That we've fabricated it. Then some of it, maybe a little bit of it, there might be a little bit of actual relative truth that's somehow substantial. I did hit you with a mallet or something like that. You have that, but then we don't look at all the other things that are around that, or what you said just before, and how I was feeling when I had for breakfast. So I'm saying we begin to see the structure of everything that's around the simple thing of this cause that. We tend to, in materialism, we tend to get caught in just strict cause and effect. And it's not that this moving through space, running into a table didn't cause that sound, but all the things that had to come together, like where'd this come from? Where did this come from? The hand that moved this through space. And who put that table there? Just a little bit of a crude example, but it seems to be like that. We start to see that we fabricated quite a bit of it. You could maybe speak to that. You some of the spinning around that you do, you kind of look and say, where does that come from? You've even said it before. I might have to paraphrase a little bit. So, where does that come from? Haven't you said that before? What's that? It's like, well, if you don't mind me saying a little bit, will be completely tied up in some kind of a thought pattern about something, and then it just kind of falls away. Well, she's been meditating for a long time. So anything that shows up in her mind or my mind or anyone's mind here, if you're a meditator, it's going to have more and more difficulty getting a foothold. It might get some, and it might be long to make the whole day miserable for you, or maybe 2 or 3 weeks. But reflect on the 3 marks of existence, the 4 marks of existence. Nothing lasts. Everything is in a state of dissatisfaction. Consciousness is in the state of distress. Life, being a living being, thinking you're a living being, is suffering. If you realize what you are and you realize you're not exactly a living being, then that suffering starts to come apart. It doesn't go away, but it comes apart in terms of there being someone who's suffering. Because as long as you're still alive, the nerve endings are still extant. And then, of course, there's no self. And there's what? Nothing lasts. So even the worst feeling that you're having today, probably going to come apart tomorrow or maybe 3 days from now. Go ahead, sir.
In Love Valley, you talk about humor and spaciousness. It seems like the opposite of that spaciousness would be the claustrophobia or the closing down.
Yes.
Is it true, or would you say that claustrophobia or closing down is due to the narrative more than the circumstance?
I think it might be hard to track. Quite often the self-centered mind wants to find one, and it's the circumstances doing it, or it's the causes and conditions, or the other person or something. But it looks like it's just a bunch of chemistry, with this and that, and all coming together, trying to find a direct cause for anything circular. And ego wants to find a reason, so it probably will settle way ahead of actually looking thoroughly. And ego isn't a particularly good detective. It just wants to find the, whatever backs up its position. Rather than, and this is quite often what happens in our contemporary politics. Whatever position, and just go in and find anything that will back that up and buy into that stuff, whether it's true or not. So like some politicians have learned that all they have to do is lie constantly. And that way they can't be tracked because nothing they say is the truth, except they just continue to say, I'm gonna run things here. And so, and there are enough people that are lost in space in that area that feel the security of someone who is so confident of their narcissism. They're so incredibly, I don't want to jump into someone like Frank Sinatra, but there's a good example of an incredible genius, a singer, maybe you know about him, who was also extremely self-centered. Was that wrong? No, not wrong at all. But you wouldn't necessarily have him running the country. Did I get close? Is there a final argument, comment? Is there a question from someone who knows a lot but wants to know a little bit more? Yes.
Are you bowing? Frank Sinatra?
Yeah. He's an egomaniac.
Didn't his mother make him that one?
I don't know. And what do I know about it? I'm just saying, I'm just picking on him. I could just easily pick on Warren Beatty. You know him? I guess I must be older than everybody. It's just that when there's a strong belief in a self, and that is pretty unwavering, then other people who want that kind of support need a leader, need someone to follow. They tend to align themselves, and that's kind of what's happening. It happened with Mussolini, and it happened with Stalin in Russia. It happened with Hitler. Der Führer. Is there? Yes, go ahead.
Sokuzan. This is kind of going back to Bune's questions, but if we were to see the spaciousness or the humor in something deadly serious like Stalin, literally people dying, would we be able to respond with our humanity, out of our humanity?
That's a good question. I think that it might not live up to people's standards. You might not become famous, this famous humanitarian. A lot of the humanitarians, I'm not saying they aren't humanitarians, but quite a bit of what is happening there is trying to appear that way, and can be pretty successful if you dedicate yourself to trying to appear as a certain kind of person. You can be successful. It's not that famous humanitarians weren't doing some good. They probably were doing some good. But if there's no mind training there, then it's just a really highly functioning, active form of ego that sees the world as real and sees it divided up into good guys and bad guys. And we have to hold down the bad and support the good. It's sacred and profane. A lot of, not all, but a lot of theistic spiritual paths emphasize good and evil. To get rid of the evil. There's no respect for the very energy of the situation. They just have to label it evil and stay away from it. And so the only problem is that it doesn't help you when your body starts to come to an end. Other than the praying to some idea of someone, greater being. Is that wrong? No, go ahead. Pray to a greater being. Most of the world is doing that. Yes.
Sokuzan, what might it look like to respond out of humanity or compassion while seeing the humor in something really?
Putting others before yourself. And that doesn't mean doing what they say or what they want. It might just be listening to them. People are suffering. Listen to people, what's happening with them, without necessarily giving them a bunch of advice. But you might, I mean, I'm a teacher, so I tend to give some people advice if they directly ask me about something. And I also say, I don't know, you're going to have to decide on that. But I also say, whatever you decide, I will support you. I mean, I'll be, unless it's committing horrible crimes or something, but if you're going to go here or there, or this, I would say, I don't know what it's like to be you. Well, but you need support. I want to help you. And so I want to make sure, you could say it this way, there's a way of saying it. I want to make sure you have somebody to talk to when things go awry, when things go haywire. I'm still here. I'm not sitting back and saying, well, you didn't do what I said. And so then I'm not going to help you anymore or something. Humanity is not separating yourself from anybody, no matter how bad they are, but also not interfering with people based on your ideas, opinions, judgments, and conclusions about it. It's painful to watch people suffer and to know that it'd be a good idea if they trained their mind a little bit, but they're not about to do that. They're going to continue to do whatever they're doing and avoid the suffering by shutting down or manipulating or believing in this or believing in that. Most of the world's doing that. If you're listening to me, then I'm recommending that you find out who you are, so you don't want to run around with unexamined passion, aggression, and ignorance that is endeavoring to support an imaginary being called me. No?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
When you're bowing, so the talk title, can you see the humor? What if you can't see the humor? Bowing.
Well, that's the failure part of it, but the failure is also spacious if you don't do anything about it. You just can't see it. So you've looked at something, it looks ragged and rough and irritating and painful, and you endeavor to see the humor in the situations that we're going in that direction, and you can't. So, but there's a spaciousness about in the ego situation. If you're a meditator, you can't do this with the intellect particularly. I'm not saying you could make a little headway there, depending on the thinking process that you are endowed with. But it seems over here to be necessary to do this with the awareness. And so if you're just receiving the awareness of the failure of seeing the humor, like you've set it up to set up, you can't see the humor. Yes, you can't see the humor. Sorry about that. I just saw my own joke. Did I see the humor? Was I pretending to laugh? What happened? What happened just there? There is no humor. That's the humor. It's not funny. It's painful. Look into it and see you can't just change that into space. Why? It's already space. You already are not separate from the Buddha. You have to realize it. If you realize it, the work is done. That doesn't mean that every day isn't going to be a pain in the butt, or that you aren't going to have to do this or that, or deal with this relationship or that one. It's done with awareness. There might be a lot of commentary, a lot of thoughts hanging around, trying to get some kind of gravitas going on, but the awareness is primary. And if you're a meditator, if you've been meditating for months, years, decades, then eventually you won't even know it. You won't get a credential. You won't realize, other than maybe some kind of backward glance, that you're functioning out of your awareness. You're no longer thinking about anything. You're no longer concerned with life and death. Because you know that what this is, you realized it. You realize that who you actually are. It used to be this body mind, but you've actually realized that you are this consciousness. And so you're not concerned with how you feel. If you're concerned with how you feel, this is ego. And you will blame yourself, you'll blame others, or you'll shut down, ignore it, try to shut it out, distract yourself for it. Go to the zoo. Go over here and do this, or just distract yourself in some way. You don't have to do that. You can train your mind. You can do this yourself. If you never see me again, you could turn this off and never come back on Zoom, or you could leave this monastery and never come back. But what you do is you should find out who you are, so you have no doubts about it. No doubts. You know what this is. And how would I say, you're not separate from anything, anywhere, no matter how evil, no matter how wonderful, no matter how neutral. It's not something else. Every tree you look at, every bird, every stone, every smile, every frown, everything is not separate from any of it. It's looking in a mirror everywhere. Good luck.
Hi, my name is Shoto, and I am a monk at SokukoJi, where I am committed to training my mind under the guidance of my teacher, Sokuzan. We rely on your support for much of what we offer here. This includes building projects to create space for full-time and part-time practice residents. Thank you for your help.